Welcome back to chapter 6. In this chapter, we're going to be talking a lot about the self and how we view ourselves and how that interacts with our society, how it changes, how we perceive the world around us. Again, it's an action-packed chapter, so hopefully you find some really good stuff in here. As we talk about the self, the first definition that comes into play in chapter 6 is the self-concept. In self-concept, you may have heard about this before, but sometimes people confuse it with self-esteem and self-efficacy. The self-concept is how you see yourself. It's an organized collection of beliefs about yourself, and it also involves your self-schemas, which is how we assess ourselves. So it's our view of how we see ourselves, not our future selves, but how we think we are, how we see us, ourselves, our capabilities. It does not reflect how others see us, but how we do. The future self is a little bit different. That actually talks about where we see ourselves going, what we see ourselves capable of in the future. So I'm not there yet, but I want to be. I have these aspirations. So how we see ourselves today directly affects how we see ourselves tomorrow. If we don't see ourselves capable of completing college, we don't see ourselves getting a degree or a job that requires a college degree. So that's really important too, and has a strong influence. One of the things that happens a lot is social comparison. And what happens in social comparison is that we compare ourselves to others. I think about almost the Facebook world. You know, I mean, when we see the Facebook of somebody, they're always happy and everything is always great. And sometimes we feel like, well, gosh, my life's not that complete. I haven't even put makeup on all day, and my dishes haven't been done, and I'm just not as happy as them. But it's not really fair because we're only seeing them in that snippet where they're showing the world their happiest. And frequently it's a reposed pose. It's not even the first pose they had. It's something they took 3 times to get that perfect vision for something. But we find ourselves comparing ourselves to others. So I'm happy if I have the same thing as others, or I'm unhappy because I don't have the same things as others. So a lot of this depends on who our reference group is, who we compare ourselves to, and who we think we should be in line with. So I don't compare myself with celebrities because I know I don't have those kind of resources. But I do have a group that I consider my peers. So who is that peer group that you refer to? In an upward comparison, sometimes it can help us and motivate us. It can help us to go, wow, Sally did this and it's something that I can obtain. It's within my self-concept. I think I'm capable of that. I could strive for that too, as long as we find it reasonable. On the back end, it can hurt us if it hurts our self-esteem. If we feel like everybody is doing better than us, and no matter how hard we tried, we can never achieve those same things. So, rather than evaluating ourselves for who we are, we have a tendency to look at other people, and we need to be aware of that. And to discover what our goals are, what we really need, what we really want. Our self-concept is also formed or influenced by the feedback that other people give us. So if people give us positive feedback, this is great, you're really smart, you're doing a great job, we start to feel better about ourselves and more confident. If we get negative feedback, this is terrible, what were you thinking, you don't know what you're doing, we tend to feel less good about ourselves. This is where parents and peers and spouses play a really big role in influencing how we see ourselves. We don't judge ourselves by how others view us, rather how we think others view us. So if we see a reaction, we assume that somebody thinks this way or that way. Sometimes if we have like a negative focus, they may have said 10 positive things and 3 negative, and we only really heard or really focused on those 3 negatives. So us and how we think can influence what's happening in that picture. Even though that person may have shared a lot of positive things, it could still influence what we see. So that's important to understand. Also, a role in there is the individualistic versus collective cultures. We talked about that in an earlier video. You do discuss it in other classes as well. But the expectations in an individualistic culture is that we achieve it, we strive. It's very individualized, that I must do better, I must strive above. In a collective culture, that's not the expectation, rather that we are part of a collective group and we all better ourselves. So that can make a difference as well. Individualistic cultures, which tend to be the United States and many of your European nations, are much more concerned about competition than those collective cultures. Our self-esteem is a little different than self-concept. So self-concept is how we see ourselves. Our self-esteem is how we feel about our worth as a person. So this is what I am. This is who I am. This is how smart I am, how pretty I am, how tall I am, how capable I am. How do I feel about who I am? So do I like me? Am I good with who I am, or am I unhappy with who I am? So that's what the self-esteem is. A higher self-esteem leads to confidence, to taking credit for our own successes and knowing who we are. A lower self-esteem leads to a lower interpersonal skills because we don't want to interact with others because we don't feel good about who we are. The ability to feel confident and skilled in our abilities makes a big difference in how we move forward, as opposed to even in the directions we'll take or the chances or risks that we'll take. We do find that self-esteem is strongly and consistently related to happiness. So if we have a higher self-esteem, we feel better about ourselves, then we are happier people. When we don't feel good about ourselves and who we are unhappy. It is also related to interpersonal skills, and again, that's the risk-taking and the willingness to go out and meet people. If we're unwilling to meet people because we feel that we're undesirable and nobody would like us, then that holds us back, as opposed to us feeling that we're pretty cool and the people around us would like to get to know us, and that helps us a lot. Our self-esteem affects us not only today, but again in our future self, because our future self is willing to take those risks because we feel that we're capable and we feel really good about ourselves. And even if we falter or we fail, we can accept that because we know we're still, pretty great. And somebody whose self-esteem is more fragile won't take those risks. We do want to be careful about avoiding things like narcissism, which isn't something you really sign up for, but somebody who's narcissistic has an elevated view of themselves, thinks of themselves as so great, and in those cases, when their ego is hit, it can lead to aggression for them. Typically, we find that self-esteem is higher in children. It then lowers in our teen years when we start to become much more self-conscious, and then increases again in adulthood as we start to become more confident in having career success and feeling more confident in our own skin, and then decreases again in older age. As we begin to age, we may feel less savvy and less capable of things that are changing around us. One of the biggest influences on our self-esteem and how it develops is our parental influence. Parents that are accepting and supportive have a strong influence on the child's self-esteem. So that's a really important message for those of you that are parents, to understand that the messages you give your child today, and think about those. Did I give my kid a capable message? Do they feel that they're valuable, capable, and worthwhile and lovable every single day? And if they don't, then that can potentially affect the self-esteem. And when that does, it's not only in today because I'm sad, but it's in their tomorrow and their future self is how they're going to see themselves. So what you do makes a big, big influence on our children. So that's an important reminder for us. Along the lines of parental involvement, there are 4 primary parental styles that are discussed in your book. I am not here to preach that one is better or less good than the others. I do have my personal preferences. However, and we know that they're influenced by culture and our rearing and things like that, but to make you aware of the different parenting styles and the implications that they have. The authoritative parent is very high in support. Very high in support, but they're very firm. They have reasonable limits. And these are associated with higher skills, or higher self-esteem rather. So they're very supportive, but they have very high demands. So they expect a lot, they have clear boundaries for their children, but they will help their children to get those boundaries. They also tend to be good listeners, but that doesn't mean they're going to take what the child says every time, but they're going to listen to it. The authoritarian is different than authoritative. The authoritarian parent, on the other hand, is lower in emotional support, but continues with those rigid limits. So it's my way or the highway. I said it. I know what's best. I'm looking out for you. Doesn't mean the authoritarian parent doesn't love their child. This is kind of an old school thinking of children should be seen and not heard, and I'm going to raise them up in the right way. Those children tend to have lower self-esteems because they don't feel themselves capable or having a voice. Permissive parents are the parents are very high in support. They are there frequently for their children, but they do not provide a lot of limits or structure to their children. And those children tend not to do as well in their self-esteem as well, because they don't have the guidance and they don't have the structure that they need to provide that. The neglectful parent is low in support and low in limits, and those children tend to do very poorly in self-esteem. They don't even understand how to move towards those things because they don't have any support or anyone to help them, and they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. So they struggle a great deal with finding their way. And there's a chart in your book. Again, I really like the charts and the graphs in this book. They can be very helpful to us. A few more things in this chapter is our self-perception. Our self-perception, how we see things, how we view the world, how it happens. One of the terms that comes up in here is the autonomic process. And this is a real important thing to know because it's mindless. It's very effortless, and we don't put any thought to it. We see something and we perceive it. It's constantly happening, but we are all different people. So what one person may perceive as an adventure, another one may perceive as a threat. But these things are just constantly happening. We're looking, we're viewing. We're not necessarily even judging, but we're evaluating those things as we move forward. A controlled process is much more mindful and focused, and it's when we're focused in trying to understand or study or in this case, not necessarily judge, but to decide how we might feel about a situation. Selective attention is another term that comes up in this situation. Selective attention simply means we're going to select what we're going to pay attention to. So those of you who have children, they make a lot of noise. So that's what they do. And as parents, we tend to ignore a lot of the background noise and only zone in on the things that we think are important or valuable. Spouses do this to each other too. Like we go, yeah, I'm listening and listening, but we don't really listen until they're upset and we notice that tone in their voice. But selective attention is I'm going to drown out the other things and pay attention to the things I want to pay attention to. We do this with background noise. Those that work in an office, we kind of get rid of the other stuff and focusing on the things that we want to focus in on. Some can do it better than others. Something else that comes up in this chapter to review, and then I'll take a break and move into part 2, are our attributions. We have internal attributions versus external attributions. What this means is when something happens, do we consider the cause, and sometimes this is very automatic. Do we think that the cause is internal, something I controlled? So if something went well, I worked really hard and I earned that. If something went bad things always happen to me. Or external. When things happen, it's just fate. You know what I mean? Somebody was going to win. Today I was talking about the lottery. I'm like, nope, we didn't win, but somebody's going to win. It's just going to be fate. I don't have a lot of internal attributions specifically to the lottery, but I do have a lot of internal attributions to success. So I know that if I put the effort in, or I believe that if I put the effort in, that hopefully it will pay off more so than if I'm lucky I'll get that opportunity. But we all have different varying degrees of that. We also have varying degrees of optimism versus pessimism. That's a hard one. So optimistically that we feel positively that good things could happen, and pessimistically that bad things typically happen, so I don't expect anything good to come out of this. So those views affect how we see the world, how we see ourselves, and how we see our future. So come on back. We're going to do part 2 and finish up chapter 6. See you soon.